This building may not be very familiar to you, but I'm sure that the magazines we make inside are. This is the home of Future Publishing, Europe's biggest publisher of computers magazines. My name's Steve Jarrett, and I'm the editor of one of those magazines, perhaps the best known of all, Amiga Format. Before we get down to business, perhaps you'd like to take a look inside. These are the offices of the biggest, best, and most famous Amiga magazine, Amiga Format. And here are a few of the people that work long and hard to bring you the most read Amiga magazine on the newsstands. Behind me is Sue White, Amiga Format's art editor. She's responsible for making sure the magazine looks as good as it does. This is Richard Jones. He's our production editor. He reads everything we write, takes out all the spelling mistakes, and makes sure it's fit to print. And this is Nick Veach, consultant editor and Amiga Format's resident technical expert. Anyway, let's leave them to get on with their work. Let's go to my desk. MusicX is probably the best known piece of music software available for the Amiga. It's capable of providing professional results and has been used by rock stars around the world. Although we gave it away on issue 58 of Amiga Format, we really didn't have the room in the magazine to do it justice. This video will show you many of the techniques used by professional musicians to record their work. And so, without further ado, over to our music expert. I hope you find this tutorial interesting and useful.
Hello, and welcome to the Amiga Format MusicX video. The aim of this short program is to introduce you to the MusicX software, which is given away on the cover disc of Amiga Format issue 58. MusicX is an extremely powerful music sequencing program designed to make composing music of any style as simple as possible. Although it can be used with the Amiga's internal sound chips, MusicX really comes into its own when used with external MIDI hardware. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface, and is the standard system used for interconnecting keyboards, synthesizers, and drum machines. If you wish to use MusicX with some MIDI equipment, you will need to have a MIDI interface connected to the serial port of your Amiga. MusicX acts very like a tape recorder, storing notes as they are entered either with a mouse or from an external keyboard. The difference is, once the notes are stored in the sequence, you can edit them until they are perfect. It doesn't matter if you missed out on piano lessons, MusicX could make you a star. Now let's get MusicX working. After the title page has appeared, the program will load and you'll see the main sequence page. It looks rather complicated, but you'll soon get the hang of it. The important parts are the playback and recording controls, the clock, the tempo and time signature settings, the editing controls, the sequence playback display, and the main sequence list. You'll hear a lot about sequences when using MusicX. A sequence is usually a collection of notes that make up a distinct part of a tune, for example, a bass line or a melody. MusicX can store up to 250 different sequences, and by arranging these in different ways, you can create the different parts of a song. For example, the introduction may only feature the bass line, whereas the middle of the song will have the melody part as well. All this is made easy if you store each part in its own sequence. A sequence can contain more information than notes alone. Special MIDI control data can be included to provide a way of altering the volume and pitch of notes. It's also possible to start and stop other sequences playing. I know this sounds complicated, but it's a very powerful feature that you use again and again. Let's get started by loading a tune I created earlier. This tune makes use of some external MIDI hardware. To load a song, or a performance as MusicX calls it, use the menu option like this. When the loading is finished, you'll see a list of all the sequences in the main track list. Each sequence has a name and lots of other associated information. SEQ is the sequence number. As I said, there can be up to 250 different sequences. Mem is an indication as to the amount of memory a sequence has taken to store. Bars is the length of the sequence in bars. Channels is a list of the MIDI channels used in the sequence, or the audio channels used. CST. A C here means the sequence contains MIDI control information, such as volume or pan. An S means the sequence starts other sequences. And a T means the sequence contains extra tempo information. Time. A sequence can work in relative or absolute time. Absolute time is really only used when using external synchronization. Name. The sequence is given a name when it is created. Try to use a name which means something, at least to you. Out. EXT means the sequence uses an external source, in other words, MIDI. INT means the sequence is relying on the Amiga's internal sound chips to make noise. The arrows are used to either switch the sequence off altogether or set the time when it starts playing. When set to 0, the sequence will start, then the main clock is reset by clicking on the begin button. You can move up and down the track list by clicking on these arrows. Now let's watch what happens when we actually start the tune playing. First we click on begin to make sure that we're playing from the beginning of the sequence. Then we click on play. Notice how the clock starts running, and also how the sequences which are playing appear in the window here. It's possible to switch tracks on and off in this column here. Notice how most of the sequences are switched off here, since the main sequence is using these sequences as slave sequences to control the main song. Watch how you can also alter the tempo setting. The tempo setting works in beats per minute, so a larger number means faster and a smaller number means slower. The transport controls work as you would expect. Pause, play, rewind and fast forward, and finally, stop. Now that we know what MusicX is capable of, let's start creating a tune from scratch. This time we'll be using the Amiga sound chips to generate the sounds, but later we'll be using the MIDI equipment. First of all, as we already have a performance in memory, we need to get rid of it, which we can do by loading the default song. This is the tune which MusicX always loads when it first starts. Unless you save over it, this will be blank with a useful metronome sequence. Now we'll load in some samples to form our instruments, which is done in the Amiga samples page. First of all, I'll load up a bass drum in the first free space. Moving on, load a snare drum. Loading in a multi-sampled bass sound. And and finally, to add some melody, a guitar sound. We can preview the samples by pressing C on the keyboard. The samples can always be tuned or have their envelopes edited if necessary. Now that all the samples have been loaded, we can return to the main sequence page to start actually writing a song. Let's create our first sequence. First of all, click on the second track down, which is the first free track. Now we'll use the special bar editor to actually enter the notes. This page is where notes and other control information are inserted. The keyboard along the left indicates the pitch of the notes on the grid. The numbers along the bottom are a measure of time. The screen will scroll from right to left as necessary. In this case, we'll be entering notes directly with the mouse, so we don't need to worry about the record transport commands. As we are using Amiga samples, we need to ensure a few extra settings are made. These are feedback and output. Otherwise, you won't hear anything. To enter some notes, we must first set their duration from the grid screen. Now we can use Add from the tool list. As you add notes, having first zoomed in to see what you're doing, you can drag them around to actually hear them. When you think you've got everything right, you can hear your masterpiece by pressing play in the transport controls. The yellow line on the screen is where the sequence will end, so make sure it's at the end of the bar. If it's not, then drag it there. You can set the number of times the bar will repeat here as well. Now we can select a different sample and add some more notes. First click on 2 in the channel select box and move to the beginning of the sequence. Remember, you can zoom in and out of the display to work on a size which is comfortable for you. The snap option is set on, which means all notes are positioned to within the resolution set in the grid menu. So let's add some drum notes. Moving individual notes is easy. Simply click on them with the mouse, and with the left button held down, drag them where they need to go. As well as dragging notes with the mouse, you can also change the pitch of a note by highlighting it and using the cursor keys to move up and down. It's also possible to change their duration if you press the cursor keys while Shift is held down. The size of the jumps are again determined by the value set in the grid window. To alter many notes, you must use Select from the tool list and drag a box around the notes. In this way, a group of notes can have their length altered or be shifted up and down in pitch. When you select notes in this way, you can also use the cut and paste commands from the Options pull-down menu. When finished, choose Exit from the File menu and click on Store. Now we're back in the main sequencer, where we can rename the sequence. So that's how to create a single sequence from scratch using Amiga samples. You should repeat the process for the rest of the percussion, the bass line, the melody, and so on. It's also important that you regularly save your work, so let's do that now, using the File menu and Save Performance. You need to make sure that you're saving the sequences, time parameters, and sample data. Assuming we've created all the sequences that we need, it's now time to arrange them into a song. Remember how I said that sequences can trigger other sequences? That's how we can build up a full arrangement. What we're going to do is create a master sequence that can play all the individual parts. First of all, we should stop all the sequences from playing. Now we can create our master sequence. Pick an unused track and edit it. Now we're back in the bar editor, but instead of adding notes, this time we're going to add sequences. Set the grid size to maximum to simplify things. Then select Add. This time click on Play Sequence, not Notes. When these are added, you'll see the name of the sequence appear on a bar. The length of the bar can be adjusted in the same way as with the length of the notes, and you can also move the sequences up and down using the cursor keys. Let's start with a little percussion. Then add some bass, starting a bar later. And then finally, the melody. Now we can return to the main sequencer page and play our finished tune. Not bad, eh? Although the Amiga sound is quite good, it's only 8-bit, which means, although it's fine for games, it's hardly good enough for a professional piece of music. Another restriction is due to the hardware. You can only play 4 samples at the same time, which can be a bit limiting. What you really need to do to get the best results out of Music X is try and get hold of some external MIDI equipment. A sound module, such as the Roland Sound Canvas, can play up to 16 high-quality sounds at once, including some really good drum sounds. Furthermore, a proper music keyboard, either a dedicated controller keyboard or a synthesizer such as this, can be used to enter notes directly into the sequencer, which speeds up the process tremendously. To use MIDI equipment like this, you'll need a MIDI interface plugged into the Amiga's serial port, with cables running to the keyboard and the sound module. The MIDI in socket on the interface connects to the MIDI out socket of the keyboard, and the MIDI out socket of the interface connects to the MIDI in socket of the sound module. You'll also need some way of listening to the output from the sound module, such as an amplifier or headphones, otherwise you won't hear anything. Right, now it's time to start to play a tune using the keyboard. We can erase everything by loading the default performance again. Now let's record a sequence in real time, rather than adding notes with the mouse. First of all, click on Begin, then click on Record. When you think you're ready, click on Go. After a lead-in of 2 bars, you should start playing. When you've finished, press stop. Now click on Store and then Edit to look at the sequence you've recorded. Everything look okay? Okay, let's go back to the main sequencer page. Now it's time to record our next track. So before we do anything else, we need to name this one. Let's add a bit of percussion to that. And click on Stop again to end. Okay, so now we've recorded our material, it's time to get it playing in time. We do this using a system called quantize, which shifts any beats that are not quite in time so that they land on the beat. First of all, let's get our kick and snare pattern working in time. Click on the sequence and click on Edit. Have a listen. Yes, could be a bit tighter. Now we need to set the quantize grid using the same window as before. Call up quantize from the modules menu. Make sure all is clicked. Select quantize. Test it out. Much better. Now we need to do the same for the hi-hat pattern, and everything will be in time. Okay, so now I've got everything running in time, we need to record some kind of bass line. We'll use a different system for this, which is step time recording. First of all, go to the next sequence in the list, then click on Edit. Make sure the grid is set to the value that you want. Click on the pause button, then the record button. Now play your first note and hold the key down. Click on Step to move the end of the note on. Let go of the key and do the same again for the next note. When you're finished, click on Stop, then release the pause. Let's hear how it sounds. Okay, let's store that away. Once you've got all your sequences in memory, you can actually set up a control sequence in the same way that you would with samples. While we're talking of control sequences, let's have a look at another area, which is transposing sequences to shift their key. To explain transposing, let's have a look at the sequence we loaded earlier. Going into the control sequence, we can have a look at how the bass line is constructed. First of all, just using a trigger sequence. But later, notice there are multiple uses of the same sequence in a row. This is because each sequence can be shifted up or down in semitones. changing the key that the whole sequence plays in. To transpose a sequence, just select it and use the slider to move it up or down. Remember that 12 steps will shift it up or down 1 octave. There are other areas of MusicX to consider, such as synchronizing to tape recorders, using the librarian to dump data to disk, or using the filter to set up keyboard maps. These are the more complex areas of the program that you don't really need to know to get started and have fun. We've given you all the basics you need to know to record, edit and play your own sequence files. So, before long, you too could be doing music just as good as this.
We've produced this series of videos as part of our commitment to you, our readers. If you have any suggestions on how we should improve the videos or the magazine itself, please write to me, Steve Jarrett, at the address at the end of this video. Thanks for joining us. Hope to see you again soon.
Additional videos in the Amiga format range include Personal Paint, an introduction to the A1200, A1200 hard drives, upgrading your machine, MusicX, Multimedia, Desktop Video Volume 1, Desktop Video Volume 2, and finally the Amiga Format Guide to Clarissa. Priced at just $14.99 each, or any three for $34.95, they represent excellent value for money. For further details, contact BVG at the address given at the end of this video.